In A Streetcar Named Desire, we can see how Williams' exploration of mental illness, sexuality and desire, gender roles, class differences, and illusion, lies, and truth reflects aspects of the world as it was when Williams wrote the play. A Streetcar Named Desire cemented Tennessee Williams' reputation as a master playwright. While still basking in the 1945 success of The Glass Menagerie, Williams backed it up in 1947 with A Streetcar Named Desire. It was a stunning Broadway debut, directed by the acclaimed Elia Kazan and starring that baddest of bad boys, Marlon Brando. He played the role of Stanley Kowalski, while the ethereal Jessica Tandy played Blanche Dubois. It was electric. After the curtain closed on the first night, the audience sat in awestruck silence before bursting into rapturous applause for 30 minutes. The production ran for another 2 years, closing in 1949 after 855 shows. Hey team, just a reminder, if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps the channel out, and our next upload could be on something taught in your next class. Thanks, and back to the video. Warner Brothers then made it into a hit film in 1951, which won 4 Academy Awards. As for Tennessee Williams, he was the toast of Broadway and Hollywood. By 1959, he'd won 2 Pulitzer Prizes and a bunch of other gongs, including a Tony Award. He seemed to go from strength to strength, but he was often a nervous wreck. Stay tuned to find out how Williams came to realise that success and failure are equally disastrous. For now, let's get to know our playwright. He was born Thomas Lanier Williams III in Mississippi in 1911. He adopted Tennessee Williams as a professional name in his 20s, while he was still a struggling writer. Williams was the middle child of 3. He had an older sister named Rose and a younger brother named Dakin. His father, Cornelius, was a travelling salesman and frequently absent. But when he was at home, Cornelius often terrorised his family with alcohol-fuelled violence and vicious bullying. He singled out young Williams for extra punishment because of his supposedly effeminate ways. A severe bout of diphtheria had left Williams a little more fragile than his siblings, but he also had a delicacy about him that triggered his father into homophobic rage. We see similar brutish behaviour in Stanley Kowalski, who was partly modelled on Cornelius and his hard-drinking, poker-playing, womanising ways. To cope with the tension in the household, young Williams bonded with his older sister, Rose. This would be the enduring relationship of Williams' life, his one true love. Sadly, Rose began showing signs of mental instability in her teen years. As an adult, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, subjected to a prefrontal lobotomy, and permanently institutionalised. This was traumatic for Williams and likely contributed to his own mental illness. He shared his sister's nervous disposition and constantly worried that he too would lose his mind. After he became successful, Williams provided for Rose's care in a more pleasant, private hospital. He often visited her and brought her to see some of his shows. Looking back, Williams said that caring for Rose was probably the best thing I've done with my life, besides a few bits of work. Of course, this brings us to the parallels between Rose and Blanche Dubois. Blanche's worsening symptoms and forced hospitalisation are drawn from the real-life tragedy of Rose Williams. In the beginning, Rose detached from reality to cope with stress or abuse. She was a fragile girl, but also very charming, and had a habit of talking incessantly, especially when nervous. This is all reflected in the complex character of Blanche Dubois. In fact, most of William's characters are composites of his dysfunctional family members and himself. He believed that if writing is honest, it cannot be separated from the man who wrote it. So, what was happening in William's life when he wrote A Streetcar Named Desire? Well, in 1945, he went to live in the French Quarter of New Orleans. You remember that this is the play's setting, or where all the action takes place. This was William's third stint in the French Quarter. He loved it there and found its bohemian atmosphere highly conducive to his writing. Williams also lived with his partner, Pancho Rodriguez Gonzalez, with whom he had a passionate and stormy relationship. And guess which streetcar Williams could hear rumbling through their neighbourhood? You've got it. It was named Desire. Williams first stayed in the French Quarter in 1939, which was a life-changing experience for him. The relaxed culture of the place allowed Williams to explore his sexuality and pursue relationships with men. Having experienced a conservative, puritanical upbringing with his mother, Williams had repressed his desires for a long time. But the laissez-faire vibe of the French Quarter fixed that. The inner conflict between pretentious gentility and raw human sexuality was an endless source of material for Williams. We can see it in the sexually charged relationship between Stella and Stanley. We also see it in Blanche, who insists on being perceived as chaste while harbouring a voracious appetite for young men. Her attempted seduction of the newsboy in Scene 5 is pretty steamy stuff. Then there's the tragedy of Alan, Blanche's young husband, whom she caught having an affair with an older man. Williams deals with sexuality and desire in the play with refreshing candour. It's a mixture of romance and savagery that rings true to human nature. But it certainly pushed moral boundaries in post-war 1940s America. The late 1940s was the dawn of the so-called golden age of American capitalism. The end of World War II ushered in an era of economic prosperity and a resurgence of old-fashioned family values. Military men, like Stanley Kowalski, returned from service to reclaim their roles as primary breadwinners. For women, it was no more Rosie the Riveter, it was back to the kitchen. The image of female empowerment during the war reverted to pre-war ideals of marriage and motherhood. Thus, traditional gender roles in the domestic sphere were reaffirmed, and the balance of power was very much in men's favour. Williams expresses this through Stanley's frequent assertions of dominance in the Kowalski household, like his invocation of the Napoleonic Code. Stella's unconditional devotion to Stanley also reflects the feminine ideal of that era. However, we occasionally see glimpses of her resentment towards Stanley's vulgarity. This partly reflects the attitude of William's mother, Edwina, towards his father Cornelius. Except Edwina's disappointment wasn't fleeting like Stella's, it was bitter and unrelenting, and culminated in her separation from Cornelius in the 1930s. Edwina Williams was more like Blanche. She embodied the archetype, or typical example, of the Southern belle. Although born in Ohio, Edwina embraced the Southern aristocratic lifestyle when her family moved to Mississippi. There she made her debut as a young lady and took on the persona of an elegant maiden of the antebellum South. Ringlets, parasols, a thick Southern accent, and a knack for flirtation. Edwina was the real deal. Thus, the class divide between Edwina and Cornelius was obvious. Like Stella, Edwina had married down. However, Cornelius's lack of earning power didn't affect their family until later. For the first 8 years of his life, Tennessee Williams lived in his grandparents' spacious, sunlit home in Mississippi. Then, when Cornelius got a job in a shoe factory in Missouri, the family moved into a tenement apartment in St. Louis. Edwina and the kids were officially declassed, and it was traumatic for them. Edwina struggled to maintain her air of refinement, and the children were bullied at school for their southern accents. Blanche experiences similar mortification when she loses the family estate, Bellerive, to creditors. Once the privileged daughter of southern gentry, Blanche can't quite let go of her pretensions and prejudices. When creating the character of Blanche, Williams imbued her with his mother's attitudes and cultural affectations, but he also drew on a deep personal well of nostalgia for his childhood in the South. Williams even said, "I write out of love for the South. I write about the South because I think the war between Romanticism and the hostility to it is very sharp there." The tension between romance and hostility is what makes A Streetcar Named Desire a Southern Gothic masterpiece. This is a genre or category of literature characterized by dark, controversial stories set in the southern states of America. Edgar Allan Poe is considered a founding father of Southern Gothic literature, and Williams makes sure to drop his name in the opening scene. Blanche's horror at Stella's living conditions causes her to conjure up ghoulish images from Poe's 1847 poem Ulalume. She sure has a vivid imagination, even for an English teacher. Blanche is also a hopeless romantic, but that's part of her charm, don't you think? She's a dreamer, a stargazer who cries out, "I don't want realism, I want magic." Kim Hunter, the actor who played Stella in the original Broadway production of A Streetcar Named Desire, once asked Williams what the theme of the play was. He replied, "Well, I think it's a plea for the understanding of the delicate people." So, what is it that we come to understand in his portrait of Blanche Dubois? Well, for a start, she explains that soft people must shimmer and glow. They've got to put on soft colours, the colours of butterfly wings, and put a paper lantern over the light. In other words, beauty, artifice, and imagination are things that make life bearable. After all, life really can be tough sometimes, and don't we all love a bit of fantasy and escapism? Like the playwright himself, Blanche creates illusions using language, because what's a play other than elaborate trickery? Good theatre is a beautiful lie that tells the truth about human nature. Williams expressed this in his earlier play, The Glass Menagerie. Remember, that was the one that first catapulted him to stardom in 1945. The main character is called Tom, which is the shortened version of Williams' real first name. In his opening lines, Tom addresses the audience and says, "I have tricks in my pocket. I have things up my sleeve. I give you truth in the pleasant disguise of illusion." Williams' mastery of illusion kept audiences coming back through the 1940s and 50s, but from the 1960s onwards, audiences and critics turned on him. After the death of his longtime partner, Frank Merlo, in 1963, Williams struggled to gain control of his life and work. He became terribly depressed and increasingly dependent on alcohol and prescription drugs. In 1983, Tennessee Williams was found dead in a hotel room in New York City. His exact cause of death is disputed, but apparently it was drug-related. What a tragic end. Then again, success was more like a curse for him. In one of his notebooks, Williams admitted that, "After Streetcar, I haven't been able to write anymore, except by terrible wrenching of the brain and nerves." It goes to show how you should always be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. Well done, team. In this lesson, we've linked aspects of William's context to his exploration of mental illness, sexuality and desire, gender roles, class differences, and illusion, lies, and truth in A Streetcar Named Desire. Armed with this knowledge, you can take the next streetcar to success. We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons, check out our other videos.